In Angular, components are where you will likely spend the bulk of your time when developing your app. Angular 4 components are simply classes that are designated as a component with the help of a component decorator. So every component has a defined template, which can communicate with the code that's defined in the component class. So let's take a close look at how components are structured. But first, we want to get a project set up so that you can follow along with this. So we want to make sure that the Angular command line interface, or the CLI, is installed. So at the command line or your console, you want to type in ng-v. And this will give you the current version of your command line interface if you have it installed. Now, if it's not, you're going to go ahead and need to install that. Now, in the previous lesson, as a part of this free course, I already showed you how to do that. So if you're arriving at this tutorial without having watched that first video, go ahead in this course and go back. Okay, so let's go ahead now, and with the Angular CLI, let's start a new project. So to do that, we're going to type ng new, and I'll just call this components 101. All right, so I'll pause this while it installs. All right, it is done. So we want to go ahead and open up the project in our code editor, and I'm using Visual Studio Code. And the first thing we want to do is look at the component that the CLI generates by default. So in source app, we'll see app.component.ts. All right, so basically, the way the Angular 4 component is structured, it's structured into 3 different sections. So let me just go ahead and get rid of real quick the sidebar, and I'll increase the size of this just slightly. And the 3 different sections that are defined that you can see here that are currently outlined, we're going to start with the very top one, which are the imports. So the way you make a class a component is by importing the component member from the Angular core library. Now, some components may have dozens of imports based on the needs of that component. So this is also where you import any services that your component may use through dependency injection, which we'll get to a little bit later. So second, we have the component decorator. And basically, we make something a decorator by adding the @ symbol. And we can see in this case, it's @component. And we could see that's also in reference to the import statement. So we're using component that was imported from the above import line. This is what makes this given class a component. So within the component, you have a variety of configuration properties that help define this given component. So the first property you see, we have selector. This is the name of the tag that the component is applied to. So for instance, if we go to the index.html, we'll see we have app root. This is what it's referring to right there. So let's go back to our class here, our component. And we also have template URL and style URLs. And this defines an HTML template and style sheets associated with this component. Now you can also change these to template and styles, which define inline HTML and CSS, which we'll get to later in the course. So there are other properties that you can define inside of this component decorator, depending on the needs of your component. So it's also where you define animations. And then finally, right here, we have our component class. So this is where the various properties and methods are defined. Any properties and methods that are defined here are also accessible from the template. And likewise, events that occur in the template are accessible within the component through different data binding techniques. And we'll get to that later as well. So it's also where dependency injection occurs within a constructor, which gives you access to various services, and we'll see that constructor and how the CLI generates that for us automatically momentarily when we use it to generate our own component. So let's go ahead and do that now with the help of the command line interface tool. So I'm going to go back here. Let me clear this real quickly. All right, let's cd into the project that we created, which is cd components 101. All right, and then let's go ahead and generate the actual component. So to do that, we invoke the CLI with ng, and then G, or we could specify generate. It doesn't really matter. G is just shorthand for generate. And then what exactly is it that we want to generate? Well, in this case, it's a component. And then the name of the component. So it would be my new component. All right, so it's very quick. And you can see that it has generated 4 different files. So let's go back to our editor and take a look at those. So we can see now here in our source app folder, we have the name of the component that we just generated. So you can see we have a CSS file, which is blank. We have the template file, which is HTML. We have our component file right here. And then we also have a spec.ts file, and that is used for unit testing. Okay, so also what happens when we generate a new component aside from it generating this folder and these 4 files right here? Well, the other area that it affects is in your app.module.ts file. And it does 2 different things here. So first it imports it, and we can see it in this line right here. And then second, it also adds it to declarations. And we can see our app component is there, as well as the name of the my new component. Now, of course, it looks a little bit redundant simply because the name I gave it. So let's examine real quickly how we can use this component and nest it into the default app.component.ts that we have already. So if I hit Control B, we can take a look at my new component here, and we can see the HTML that's associated with it. My new component works. I'm just going to change this real quickly to I've been inserted. We'll save that. Okay. And then also, if we look at the app component.ts right here, or the my new component rather, we'll see that we have a selector called app my new component right here. All right, so let's copy that. We're going to go to the default app component.ts right here, and we notice that the template URL is the app.component.html. Right underneath the title, let's go ahead and add a selector for that. So what we'll do, and we'll save that just like that. We'll go back to the console, and I'm going to type ngserve. And once it's complete, you can visit localhost 4200 on your browser, and you can see I've been inserted. So really we have 2 different components taking place right here, which is default app.component.ts and then the my new component right here. And that in a nutshell is how components work. Now, of course, there's a little bit more to them once you get more in depth and detail, but that is the basic fundamentals of components. So now that you understand components, we're going to take a closer look at templating in Angular 4 in the next lesson. See you then.